You know, Alex, people look at a car and see a flashy engine or a sleek paint job, but the real soul of the machine is the part that actually shakes hands with the road. I spent all yesterday evening under that old truck, and I swear, the suspension was fighting me like a stubborn mule that didn't want to cross a creek.
Well, considering the noises it was making when you pulled in, I'm surprised the wheels hadn't just decided to quit and go their separate ways. It sounded like a toolbox falling down a flight of stairs.
It wasn't quite that melodic, it was more of a rhythmic groan. But that's the thing, your car is always talking to you. It's just that most folks don't start listening until the vehicle starts shouting. We're diving into the skeletal system today, steering and suspension. It's what keeps you from feeling every pebble like a personal insult from the pavement.
It's one of those systems that feels like magic until something breaks. You turn the wheel, the car turns. Easy, right? But looking at the underside of your truck, there's a whole lot of linkage and geometry going on that looks suspiciously like a giant metal puzzle.
It basically is. You got two main schools of thought on how to point those wheels. You have the rack and pinion, which is what most cars use today. It's elegant, just a round gear, the pinion, walking along a flat bar of teeth. Simple, direct, like drawing a line with a ruler.
And the other one? The one that looks like it belongs on a steam engine?
That's the conventional or recirculating ball system. You find that on the heavy hitters, full-size trucks, SUVs, the stuff built to haul more than just groceries. It uses a gearbox that moves a pitman arm back and forth. It's beefy, but it's got more joints than a family reunion, which means more places for things to get sloppy over time.
Sloppy is the right word. I've driven some old trucks where the steering wheel has about 3 inches of suggestion before the tires actually decide to move.
I call that nautical steering. You're not driving, you're just navigating the general direction of the horizon. Usually that's down to the tie rod ends or the idler arm just giving up the ghost. When those joints lose their grease and start wearing down, they develop a gap. That gap is the silence between you telling the car to move and the car actually doing it.
So if I'm feeling that suggestion in my steering, where do I start? Do I just start tightening bolts until the shivering stops?
Don't you dare. If you just crank down on things without knowing why, you're liable to snap a stud and end up in a much deeper hole. You have to be a bit of a detective. I usually get the front end up in the air and do the clock test. Grab the tire at 9 and 3 o'clock and give it a wiggle. If it dances, your steering linkage is likely the culprit. Grab it at 12 and 6, and if it clicks, you're looking at ball joints or wheel bearings. It's like the car is giving you a secret handshake to tell you where it hurts.
Okay, let's talk about the suspension side of the house. You mentioned it keeps the ride comfortable, but I noticed you were wrestling with something called a McPherson strut earlier. It looked like a giant pogo stick wrapped in a heavy-duty spring.
That's exactly what it is. The McPherson is the minimalist dream. It combines the shock absorber and the spring into one unit. It saves space, which is why almost every front-wheel drive car on the planet uses them. But man, they are under a lot of tension. Working on those springs is like trying to put a tuxedo on a bobcat. You have to respect the energy stored in that coil, or it'll remind you very quickly why safety glasses exist.
Are you telling me you've had a spring fly across the shop before?
Let's just say there's a dent in the back wall that wasn't there when I bought the place. I didn't have the spring seated quite right in the compressor. It let go with a sound like a freight train hitting a gong. That was my lesson in tension management.
Transitioning from terrifying springs to actual handling, what about the short, long arm setup? I've seen that on the specs for beefier cars. What's the advantage of having arms of different lengths?
It's all about the scrub. Imagine the wheel moving up and down as you hit a bump. If the arms were the same length, the wheel would move in and out, literally scrubbing the rubber off your tires against the asphalt. By making the top arm shorter, the wheel tilts slightly inward as it rises. It keeps the footprint steady. It's a clever bit of geometry that saves your tires from a premature death.
Speaking of premature death, I was reading that study guide you left on the bench. It talked about bushing preloading. That sounds like something I'd do to a capacitor, not a piece of rubber.
Oh, that's a classic trap. When you replace a control arm or a bushing, you'll be tempted to tighten all the bolts while the car is still up on jack stands with the wheels hanging down. But if you do that, when you drop the car back on the ground, those rubber bushings are already twisted halfway to their breaking point.
So the rubber is pre-stressed just by the car sitting still?
Precisely. You drive over one pothole and snap, the rubber tears because it had nowhere left to go. You have to wait until the weight of the car is back on its own feet before you do that final torque wing. It's about letting the parts find their natural neutral position.
It's the little things that get you, like the tire conicity I saw in the NWCA guide. I thought tires were just round, but apparently they can be secret cones.
It's a manufacturing ghost. Sometimes the belts inside the tire aren't perfectly centered. To the eye, it looks like a normal tire, but as it rolls, it wants to lead the car to one side, like a shopping cart with a bad wheel. If your car is pulling to the right and the alignment is perfect, swap the front tires left to right. If it starts pulling to the left, you've found a cone.
That's a great trick. What about the steering wheel vibrating? Every time I hit 60 miles per hour in my old sedan, it felt like I was holding a chainsaw.
Most people jump straight to, I need an alignment, but an alignment usually won't cause a shake. A shake is almost always something spinning that isn't balanced. It's a lead weight that fell off a rim or a big clump of dried mud stuck inside the wheel. It could even be a flat spot if the car sat too long. But if it only happens when you touch the brakes, then you're talking about warped rotors.
It's like being a doctor for things that can't talk. You have to interpret the shivers and the groans.
It really is. And the most important talk the car does is through the tires. If you look at your tread and see feathering, where the edges of the tread blocks feel sharp in one direction but smooth in the other, your toe is out. The tires are basically trying to point away from each other while you're forcing them to go straight. You're essentially dragging them sideways down the highway.
Which I imagine is great for fuel economy.
About as good as dragging a boat anchor behind you.
You know, we've talked a lot about the heavy mechanics, but for the hobbyist at home, what's the one thing they should never ignore? If the car starts making a certain noise, when is it time to stop waiting and seeing and start wrenching?
If you hear a clunk when you turn the wheel or hit a small bump, that is your ball joints or tie rods saying they're ready to leave the chat. If a ball joint fails while you're moving, the wheel can literally fold underneath the car. It's not a limp home type of situation. It's a you are now a passenger situation.
That got dark quickly.
Well, the shop is a place of honesty. I've seen the results of I'll fix it next month. But on the flip side, there is nothing, and I mean nothing, more satisfying than taking a car that handled like a bowl of jello and giving it back its precision. When you replace those worn out shocks and those crunchy bushings, the car feels 10 years younger. It tracks straight, it corners flat, and suddenly you remember why you like driving in the first place.
It's about restoring the connection.
Exactly.
So, what's the takeaway for the folks listening at home who might be eyeing that mysterious puddle of power steering fluid or wondering why their steering wheel is suddenly off center?
Don't let the complexity scare you. At the end of the day, it's just pivots, levers, and cushions. Start with the easy stuff. Check your tire pressure, look for leaks, and do that wiggle test on the wheels. But most importantly, respect the symptoms. If the car feels different than it did last week, there's a reason.
And maybe don't compress any springs unless you're absolutely sure you've got the right tools and a very sturdy wall.
And a healthy dose of humility. Every time I pick up a wrench, I remind myself that the machine is always the one holding the answers. I'm just the guy trying to translate.
Well, I think I'm going to go check my tire tread for feathering before I head home. You've made me paranoid.
Paranoia is just another word for preventative maintenance, Alex. See you in the shop next time.